Hello guys, welcome to Redditor's Revenge. Here we post amazing revenge stories daily, and if you want more content like this, please do subscribe to the channel and stay tuned with us. Moving to today's first story, about how OP's greedy aunt took her house and kicked her out of the house. So OP's grandmother helped her to get the house back, and ruined the greedy aunt's plan. Now story. My name is Miranda, I'm 18 years old and I'm currently homeless. I know what you must be thinking. Where are this girl's parents? Did she get kicked out? What is going on with her home life? To recap, it all started when I was 17 years old. I was an only child, and my parents had given me all the love in the world. We lived with my frail and elderly grandmother, who was getting on in years. She was still as sharp as she had always been but tended to get sick a lot. My parents were immensely successful in their respective careers, and their careful saving, along with the fact that they only had 2 dependents, made them extremely financially stable. They had planned everything for my future. I was an excellent student with straight A's and was hoping to get into my dream university soon. They had set up a college fund for me and had saved up all the money I would need for my dorm room expenses and other needs. In short, life was perfect. One day, I came home from school to find my grandmother alone in the house. My parents had told me that they might go out for a while, and I knew that they loved taking the bus to an old park across the city where they had fond memories of their young days. However, it was getting a bit late, and they were usually home by now since they knew I would be coming home at this time. I called both of their cell phones but couldn't get through. 3 p.m. came by and went. Then 4 p.m. Finally, at 5, after I had made sure that Grandma was comfortable and had everything she needed, I told her that I was leaving to check the local bus stop and to call me if they came home. On the way to the bus stop, I phoned the police, reporting that both of my parents were missing, and that I couldn't get through to them. They told me that they'd check with local law enforcement. I made my way to the bus station, intending to ask the security footage guy to show me that day's footage to make sure they had indeed taken the bus. Before I could get there, however, my phone rang. It was the police calling me back. They said that there had been a terrible bus accident in the city and that they had recently identified my parents' dead bodies after pulling them from the wreckage. I couldn't believe my ears. I was sure that they were wrong, that they had misidentified the bodies. I asked them the address of the hospital where the victims had been taken and took a cab there. When I got there, I was horrified to find that the police had been speaking the truth. My parents' bodies lay in the morgue, their eyes open, white clothes placed on top of them. I broke down, crying and yelling. A nurse soon came by to comfort me, asking me if there was anyone that she could call. I remembered my poor grandma, who would be devastated at losing her child at such an age. I thanked the nurse and raced home. I broke the news to my grandma, comforting her and assuring her that everything would be fine. Since I was still a minor, I had to take Grandma to the hospital to get them to release the body. I also informed my parents' lawyer about the unprecedented circumstances. He said that after the funeral, he would disclose the contents of the will. There were very few family members at the funeral. Both my parents had come from small families. There were a few distant relatives, but the ones I recognized were my aunt, my mother's sister, and her family. I had always been close with their daughter, Emma, and after the funeral, she hugged me, telling me that Aunt had talked to Grandma, and they were going to be staying at our house till the entire matter got settled. That evening, the lawyer came by, announcing something shocking. He said that my parents had explicitly stated in their will that if they were to die early, my aunt would be the executor of their will. I would receive all of their property and shared assets, but only after I turned 21. This did not include my college fund but did include the house that we lived in. Until then, she could decide what to do with it. For all intents and purposes, the house temporarily belonged to her. I was too stunned to notice at this time, but my aunt could barely contain her glee. She looked ecstatic to be living in such a lovely house and remarked that the house was at a prime location and would have a great market value. The lawyer bid us goodbye and left. Immediately, my aunt sprang up and said that she was taking over all household duties from now. She bustled into the kitchen, taking my uncle with her, and shutting the door. I took my grandma upstairs and wondered about what would become of me now. I didn't want my aunt and her family living in my house. Unfortunately, there didn't seem to be anything that I could do about it. At dinner that night, my aunt had changed into a completely different person. She said that from now on, this was her house and that I was to leave immediately and find alternate living arrangements. Shocked, I protested, telling her that I had lived in this house all my life and this was a temporary arrangement. She said that she didn't care, she was going to live it up while she still could, and that right now, I was the stranger, not them. She didn't want me living here anymore, and that if I didn't get out of my own accord she would get the police to come and evict me. This was the second shock I got in such a small time. I had just lost my parents, and now my scheming aunt wanted to kick me out of the only home I'd ever known. I wanted to shout at her and scream about the unfairness of it all, and how everything was being taken from me one after the other. However, from her expression, I knew she would be good at this threat. Without a word, I ran out of the room. I ran to my room and filled up all the suitcases I had. I intended to leave first thing in the morning, but I had to do something first. That night, I stole into my parents' old room and took everything of value. I took my dad's watch collection and all of my mom's jewelry, along with all the personal items and pictures I could find. She could take everything else, but she wasn't going to take our memories. The next day, I left. Before I made it past the front gate, Emma ran up to me and told me that she was so sorry about what her mom had done and she would try to talk her out of it. She gave me some money and said that she would get me more when she got it. I went to a friend's house and explained the situation to her. She invited me to stay, but I said that I didn't want to be a burden to anyone and I just needed her to take care of all of my valuables while I figured out what to do. I went to a local shelter and thought about what I could do. I was supposed to leave for college soon, but I had to survive on my own, till graduation. I thought about poor grandma, stuck in that house without me. I stayed at the shelter for a while. It was rough going, and I was afraid of getting mugged, but things weren't as bad as I had thought they would be. A couple of days later, when I was talking to my grandma, she said she might have a plan for getting me the house back, but it would take a while. I told her not to worry about me and take care of herself. I didn't want her to get sick due to stress or anxiety. She also told me that as soon as I had left, my aunt had started some minor renovations in the house with her own money. She was planning on constructing a pool in our garden and revamping the patio. She was also getting the house repainted. My grandma warned me that my aunt was up to no good, and to be careful. A few days later, I got a call from Emma, who was giddy with happiness. She said that the family had talked to my aunt and made her see reason and that she was doing a terrible thing to her only sister's child. She had reflected upon her actions and was sorry for what she had done. She was inviting me back home with open arms and was willing to let me regain control of the house. She was going to completely sign over the house to me. She had drawn up all the papers and was going to be waiting for me next weekend at the house. I was over the moon with joy. I cried with happiness, thankful that she had seen the error of her ways. Things were finally looking up for me. I spent the rest of the week in a daze daydreaming about living in my own house again. Finally, it was Friday. I was getting ready to go over to my friend's house and retrieve my stuff to take back to the house tomorrow when I got a call. It was my grandma. She was whispering, as if careful to not be overheard. She told me that my aunt and her family had constructed a trap for me and were using Emma to help accomplish it. This was how it was. My aunt, after having planned the renovations with her own money, had decided that she would somehow trick me into completely signing the house over to them so that I wouldn't get it back even after I turned 21. They had intended to renovate the house and up its market price. They were going to sell the property at a very high price and get rich. For that, they needed my signature. So they devised a fake plan that Emma would call me and say that her mother was sorry and wanted me back. They would invite me over and tell me that I could have the house back and give me the papers to sign that would make it possible. However, the papers would say something completely else and give my aunt sole control of the property forever. Then they could kick me out of their lives forever and start their new lives after screwing me over. I was devastated, but more than that, I was furious. I wanted revenge. I swore to myself that I would get the house back, no matter what. My grandma further said that she had a plan. She was going to tell the family that she had some old property, and that she wanted to give it to my aunt since she was old now and wasn't going to do anything with it anyways. She would get her all excited about the prospect of her father's riches, and tell her that she needed to sign papers that she would think were transferring over the property from grandma to herself. But in reality, they would be papers dissolving her parents' decision to withhold the house from her till she was 21 and immediately transfer all ownership rights to me. However, for this plan to work, grandma needed to lay some groundwork first so she could get a lawyer to draw up the necessary paperwork. This would also require me to not show up at my house tomorrow. Energized by our new plan, I finished talking to grandma and phoned Emma right away. I told her that I was very sorry, but I had to leave over the weekend to visit some potential colleges that I was thinking of applying to. I had a couple of colleges in different states on my itinerary and it would take about a week or so. After hearing this, she sounded very disappointed and asked me whether I could visit them before leaving. I knew what she was trying to do, so I told her that it was very urgent and that all of my friends were going together right now, and if I didn't leave in a few hours, I would have to go all alone. She finally agreed that they would move up the date to next week. I spent the rest of the week hiding out to make sure that my cousins or my aunt didn't accidentally see me around town. I got weekly updates from grandma about how her plan was going. After a couple of days, she said she had the papers ready and was going to ask my aunt to sign them the next day after she came home. The next day, I waited anxiously for grandma's call. Around dinner time, she called me and told me that the plan had been a huge success. My aunt had greedily signed the papers without reading anything or consulting a lawyer because my grandma had exaggerated, and went on and on about the market value and size of the property she was transferring over. I was incredibly relieved because no matter what happened next, I had my house back. I had Grandma send over pictures of the documents to ensure I still had proof in case they got lost. That weekend, as planned, I went to my house. My aunt met me at the door, all tearful and apologetic. She cried and told me how sorry she was about what she had done. She took me inside and said we could sign the papers after lunch. She had a great dinner prepared, and I enjoyed every second of it, envisioning their faces when the truth would be relieved. Afterward, with the papers in front of me, I thanked my aunt with a smile and picked up the pen. Before signing, however, I told her that I should read the papers, just in case. Flustered, she said there was nothing to read and what would I understand anyway since I was so young and had no knowledge about the law. I still insisted on reading it beforehand and picked up the papers. Angrily, she ripped them out of my grasp, telling me to sign the papers as is. Calmly, I asked her why. She was speechless. I then told her that I knew all about her plans because Grandma had warned me about them. Additionally, I told her that the papers she had signed without reading had transferred the house back to me. Next, I told her to get the hell out of my house like she had done to me before and told her that I would call the police if she didn't comply. Grandma chose that moment to walk in with a pile of papers, showing them to my aunt. My aunt read through them and then angrily ripped them apart, saying that no, we had nothing. Laughing, Grandma told her that those documents were a copy and the real ones had already been submitted in court, so now the house was officially mine. This time, I didn't even let them stay a night. I kicked them out straight away and also told my aunt that all the money she invested in painting the house and paying the construction company to build the pool in advance had gone down the drain. She was much poorer than when she had arrived. She yelled and screamed at me that this was her house and she would get it back, so I called the cops and had her forcefully evicted from my property. My aunt and her family finally left, and I decided that as long as I lived, I would never see or speak to them again. From then onward, the only family I would have was my sweet, sweet grandma. Now, here is the end of our first story, and I hope you are enjoying my content. OP's aunt, in my view, is a complete witch, and she may have convinced OP's parents to include her as a carer in their will. Who knows how long she may have plotted. But I'm delighted OP have such a kind and loving grandmother. She reminds me so much of my grandmother. In addition, the greedy witch got what she deserved. Guys, let me know your opinion about the story, or you can also share your good memories with your grandmother in the comments section, and I love to read them. So before moving to final story, please hit the like button and do subscribe to the channel to stay tuned with us for more awesome stories. Now, moving to our final story, about how a Tinder guy dumped and publicly shamed OP for being fat. So she took her vengeance and embarrassed him in front of his date. Now story. Due to the well of my friend's deaf not an axe murderer date recommendations drying up, I have turned to that most sacred of modern relationship institutions, online dating. As a very busy person trying to get it in with other very busy people, I prize honesty and directness above all else when it comes to profile creation. I include full body shots in my photos, try to minimize the use of my space angles in selfies, and write at the very top of the summary, caption, profile that I am fat. Not curvy, not thick, not lots to love, I'm ducking fat. I'm not ashamed of it, but I also know that weight is a deal breaker for lots of people. I don't want to waste anyone's time. About a year ago I met Evan via Tinder. We exchanged friendly messages for a few hours one night and agreed to meet up for drinks the following evening. I waited for a full hour past the designated time, and just as I was getting up to leave, the text started rolling in. I can see you sweating from here. How long does it take you to roll out of bed every morning? Is there an earthquake or are you just getting up for more pretzels? Idiotic, juvenile shit. 4 separate numbers, commenting on things like my clothes, which clued me in that the senders were nearby. This went on for 15 minutes before I finally saw Evan, trying to hide at a corner table and giggling with a group of buddies. I made eye contact, saw that he saw me, and then walked out. The text kept up until I blocked the numbers a few hours later. I ran into Evan about 3 weeks later. We got on the same elevator, and he tried hard at being super interested in the emergency phone instructions. I just confronted him, and he admitted it was just some game that he and his friends play. He knew I was fat before agreeing to meet up. They all did because that's what they do. Match up with fat women, then either ghost them or troll them at the meetup. It was also kinda obvious he'd never seen any consequences from this bullshit, as he was sweating pretty hard and looked more humiliated than I felt. I just said whatever and walked out, expecting to never see him again. About a month ago, some local foodie wrote a great review of the restaurant I own, and we've been slammed ever since. In the past, I stayed mostly in the kitchen, but I've been doing more and more front of house stuff lately, and on Valentine's Day I was working a bit of a split between the two. I saw Evan just as he was pushing in his date's chair. My name isn't in the restaurant, and he didn't see me. I checked the section up at the hostess stand and saw that one of my favorite old-timers, Nan, was going to be his waitress. I went to the bar till took out $400, put it in her hands, and said, "This is going to be your only table for the rest of the night. You are going to make this the worst date he has ever been on." She spilled every single thing she brought out to the table, all over him. I was waiting for him to blow up on Nan, but he bottled it up, obviously trying to make a good impression on his date. She seemed like a perfectly lovely lady. I told Nan to make sure everything was good for her and terrible for Evan. She poured ice water on his duck, she smacked the back of his head with the edge of a tray, spilled soup on his shirt, and dropped every fork he asked for. I oversalted his food, used the shit liquor for his drinks, and used flour instead of sugar on his dessert. To be honest, I don't know why he didn't just walk out. He must have wanted to duck this woman. Finally, he cracked, demanded Nan find the manager and bring her out. I was only too happy to emerge from the kitchen with my chef's coat and say what? I'm not ashamed to admit, I'd been planning out all night. I would have said hi earlier, but I didn't want the earthquake to disturb your dinner. I will savor the look on Evan's face for the rest of my life. He was a little too flummoxed to explain, so I pulled a chair up to the table and introduced myself to his date, Amanda. Told her how I met Evan, showed her some fun old messages. Then I gave her a voucher for a free meal on her next visit and told Evan to get the duck out and never come back. I never saw him again, and he deleted his Tinder profile. Now, here is the end of our today's story. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. And what nasty people Evan and his pals were. These idiotic holes are humiliating and body-shaming good people for their own amusement, with no regard for the consequences. I'm delighted Opus stood up to him and gave him a harsh lesson. Also, the ending was quite satisfying. Guys, let me know what's your opinion about this story in the comments section. So before leaving, please hit the like button and do subscribe to the channel to stay tuned with us for more awesome stories.